Get ready. You're listening to Give God 90 live.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey, it looks like we are live on a Wednesday night, and it is Passover 2020. So this isn't exactly the Passover we had planned a couple of months ago. I have to be honest with everyone. This isn't exactly what we had in mind when we started preparing for Passover in
October,
November. January, February. Things got closer and plans changed and plans evolved. Things had to happen. But we're making the most we can of it. And, as people are joining in, and we expect a few, some people have already celebrated Passover because it's already been their Passover. Some people are doing it now. Some people will be doing it later. So whenever you listen to this or whenever you watch this on YouTube, depends, because we are doing this at the same time on Spreaker and the Give God 90 app as we are on Facebook Live. So whenever we do that, we kind of know that people don't always have the opportunity to watch right now or listen right now, and they listen later and they'll comment and do things. So that's always a good thing. And we enjoy having that. But it doesn't matter that this isn't what we had planned. It still happens. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are really upset that Benjamin Netanyahu said, look, we're not doing your Passover you're used to doing in Israel this year. Nobody's going to leave their houses. And quite honestly, that is a lot like the very first Passover. Mm-hmm. Because Moses said, you eat your supper, and then you just don't leave your house till morning. Which was kind of odd in a way because, hey, Rebecca's watching. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Because when Moses said, you're gonna prepare the lamb, this is how you're gonna cook it, this is what you're gonna do, you're gonna eat it standing up like you're getting ready to go any second, but you can't get out of your house till morning. So kind of strange that happens. But Israel today is much like that because Benjamin Netanyahu said, with your own family, just like the first one, now don't leave your house. Mm-hmm. Exactly like the first one. There's Pam, and I know her whole family's watching.
Yes, they are.
Alden and Max Fenton, and I'm not sure who else she's got down there with her, but she's got the crew. Mm-hmm. Hopefully her son Toby's with her, I believe. That would be nice as well. So just like the very first Passover, Israel's in lockdown. Much of the United States is in lockdown. We have counties across the United States where you can't get in and out of the county. You're stuck. But that's okay, because that's the way it is. That's the way it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And Passover, really, as we studied, there's Jay on Spreaker.
Hi, Jay.
Glad to
Hi,
see
Tina.
you and
Hi,
Tina
Carol.
and Carol.
We're keeping you guys in our prayers.
Just like the very first Passover, we get hung up on some things because Passover has become about a meal. Mm-hmm. And Passover is not about a meal. In fact, the meal was a very small part of it. The meal itself was to be eaten in haste, and it was to be such a quick thing. Guess what? There's nowhere in Scripture that says, by the way, you pray for your meal. It was, you cook it, you eat it, and you wait till morning, but you wait. You get ready, because they were about to get chased out of Egypt. And that's what we really want to concentrate on. The meal in itself it's just an event. But through the years, especially after the Babylonian exile, this thing called Passover became a metaphor for the entire week. They looked at this whole, just like Christians today talk about Holy Week and includes Palm Sunday, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and all the other good stuff that goes with it. They call it Holy Week. Passover became not just the meal at Passover, but it also became the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It became first fruits, and it all leads to other things as well, including Shavuot. So that all kind of rolls in there together. So don't let the language fool you. But because we've got to do it a little bit different tonight, we are going to tell the story. And I was really hoping to do this. When I started writing this a couple of months ago, my hope was that several people would be standing in a room reading part of this. But now it's just me and you, because apparently we're isolating all by ourselves. So we're alone all by ourselves. There you go. Glad you made it to Carol's, Dad. I'm glad to see it. And I know that there's other folks watching too. And if you want to leave a message on a speaker, don't forget it's the little balloon-looking thing there that does it. Kathy's watching. Hi, Kathy. Glad to see
Kathy.
you. When Moses returned from the land of Midian, Aaron met him, and Moses told him everything that the Almighty had said. Moses went with Aaron to meet with the elders, but it was actually Aaron that told the elders why Moses had returned and that God had heard their screams for mercy. Now, a lot of times it talks about their crying out for their mercy. If you read that in Hebrew, they were screaming, they were begging, they were doing everything in their power to get the attention of their God. Today we remember their story. Today we celebrate our Creator in the way He chooses to free His people from their bondage. For many of us, their story is our story. Hebrew slaves long ago forced to endure the will of their masters connect us to the saving grace of God. Their prayers are our prayers. When we scream, please God, save us. And we're going to tell their story. Because all of the work that Joseph had accomplished, everything he was able to do when he first came to Egypt, not just to save his brothers from a terrible famine, but really it wound up saving an entire nation. Karen joined us too. Good to see you, Karen.
Hey, Karen. Hi, Matt, if you're watching.
What Joseph did really helped to establish the building of the nation. Apparently, parts of several nations as well, because that was a mixed multitude that left Egypt. Don't forget that. That's important. But that was all forgotten very, very soon. In Exodus 1, 6 through 8, we read, "When Joseph died, as did all his brothers and all that generation, the children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew extremely numerous, so the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king." Francisco's watching. Glad to see you. A new king over Egypt. But he didn't know Joseph. He didn't know what Joseph began. But what had begun as a gift from a former Pharaoh quickly turned into a huge burden for a young nation of Israel. Now, if you want to read Exodus 1, 9 through 16.
Look, the people of Ben Yisrael are too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or else they will grow even more numerous, so that if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land. So they set slave masters over them to afflict them with forced labor, and they built Patham and Ramius as storage cities for Pharaoh. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread. So the Egyptians dreaded the presence of Ben Yisrael. They worked them harshly and made their lives bitter with hard labor, with mortar and brick, doing all sorts of work in the fields. In all their labors, they worked them with cruelty. Moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Sephora, and the other was Pruha, and said, "When you help the Hebrew women during childbirth, look at the sex. If it's a son, then kill him. But if it's a daughter, she may live."
The cool thing about this is even in their situation, before they knew they were going to need rescuing, the Almighty had started to work something. Because there was a very special baby about to be born to a family from the tree of Levi. In Exodus chapter 2, we read, "The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. Now when she saw that he was perfect, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took a basket of papyrus reeds, coated it with tar and pitch, and she put the child inside and lay it in the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood off at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe, while her maidens walked along the riverside. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent a handmaid to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw the child, a baby boy, crying. She had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrew children.' Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Should I go and call a nurse from the Hebrews to nurse the child for you?' Pharaoh's daughter said, 'Well, go.' So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child and nurse him for me. I will pay you for your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him. After the boy grew older, she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she named him Moses, saying, 'Because I delivered him out of the water.' Moses grew, learning everything that the grandson of a Pharaoh should learn, but he never forgot who he really was. And finally, one day in Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, we read, "Now it happened in those days, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his brothers and saw their burdens. He noticed the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So he looked around, and when he saw there was nobody, he killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand." Moses left Egypt, and he was probably expecting never to return. Across the desert, he went into the land of Midian. Good.
Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came and drew water. They filled the troughs of water to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them away. So Moses stood up, helped them, and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father said, "How come you've returned so soon today?" So they told him, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds. He also drew water for us and watered the flock. Where is he then?" he said to his daughters. "Why did you leave the man behind? Invite him to have some food to eat." Moses was content to stay with the man. Later, he gave Moses his daughter Sephora. She gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, saying, "I have been an outsider in a foreign land."
Keep going.
Now it came about over the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. Ben Israel groaned because of their slavery. They cried out, and their cry from slavery went up to God. God heard their sobbing and remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God saw Ben Israel, and he was concerned about them.
See, God had prepared Moses. He'd given him access to the best education that was possible in Egypt. He made sure that he knew the terrain, not just in Egypt, but in the land of Midian. And he had chosen him to bring his people. Then, when he was ready, when the time was right, he called Moses into his presence. I see Sean's joined us too. Glad to see you, Sean. He called Moses into his presence. Man. The greatest job interview in all of history. And if you want to learn how to prepare for a job interview, Robin's even here. If you want to learn how to prepare for a job interview, read Moses' account in Exodus where he is being interviewed by the Almighty. That's how you do a job interview. That's how you respond to the questions. It works, by the way. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 14, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led to the flock to the forest end of the wilderness, coming to the mountain of God, of Horeb. I have to laugh for just a second because when Pam was here and I put that out, there was actually a gentleman from Israel who commented on it and said, I am so glad that you had her with you to do that. That was the best interview I've heard about Mount Horeb. Don't forget, that's what they used to call that name. Mm-hmm. Jews still do. Then the angel of God appeared to him in a flame of fire from within a bush. He looked and he saw the bush was burning with fire, yet it was not consumed. Moses thought, I'll go and I'll look at this. This is a great sight. Why is this bush not burning up? When Jehovah saw that he had turned to look, he called to him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe. He answered him, Hine, here I am. He said, come closer, but take off your sandals. This is holy ground. This ground is set apart. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face. He was afraid to look. Jehovah said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their screams because of their slave masters. I know their pains. I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land into a good, a large land flowing with milk and honey, into the places of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I got all those names right, by the way. Now, watch. The cry of the children of Israel has come to me. I have seen their oppressions that the Egyptians have inflicted on them. Come now. I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said, whoa, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children out of the land of Egypt? He said, I will surely be with you, so that you will be the sign. So that will be the sign to you, that is, I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the children of Israel and say, God of your fathers has sent me to you. God of your fathers has sent me to you. What am I supposed to tell them? Who am I supposed to say sent me to you? I can hear this. Have you ever been in a job interview and they ask you a question and you look at them kind of funny and you're like, what do you mean I'm supposed to do that too? No, I can't do that. I'm not trained for that. And they say, yes, you are. We'll take care of it because you're important to them at that point. God said, Moses, tell them, I am who I am has sent you. You are to say, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, the Father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob sent me. This is his name forever, and the name which should be remembered from generation to generation. Moses argued. He tried to refuse, but he finally relented and agreed to accept the job that the Almighty was giving to him. See, when somebody really wants you to work for them, they're going to talk you into the job. Mm-hmm. If you have the qualifications it takes, you don't have to sell yourself to the interviewer.
That's right.
The whole idea is to get them to sell you the job. And that's exactly what Moses did. He didn't really want it. He didn't want to go back to Egypt. He was happy right where he was. But with hopeful hearts, the children of Israel waited while Moses and Aaron went to see Pharaoh. In Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. Go ahead.
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "This is what Adonai, God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a feast for me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is Adonai, that I should listen to his voice and let Israel go? I do not know Adonai, and besides, I will not let Israel go." They answered, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness, so we may sacrifice to Adonai our God, or else he may strike us with pestilence or with the sword."
Sean commented on Facebook for all the folks listening on Spreaker. He said, "There's no point in saying no. There's no point in saying no to the Almighty," and he's absolutely right. What the people didn't expect was exactly how Pharaoh was going to respond. But God had another plan. He knew he needed to harden Pharaoh's heart. He knew he had to set this stage. So in Exodus 5, 4, and following, go ahead.
But the king of Egypt said to them, "Why do you, Moses and Aaron, make the people break loose from their work? Go to your labors." Then Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are now so numerous, yet you would have them rest from their labors?" Then on the same day, Pharaoh commanded the slave masters of the people and their foremen, saying, "You are not to give the people any more straw to make bricks as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves, but impose on them the quota of bricks that they made previously. Don't reduce it, for they are lazy. That's why they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Let even heavier work be laid on the men, so that they must labor, paying no attention to deceptive words."
Making bricks is backbreaking work. And now they needed to gather their own straw as well. Moses felt sorry for the people, and he asked God, why have you done this thing? In Exodus 5:22.
So Moses returned to Adonai and said, "Adonai, why have you brought evil on these people? In this way you sent me. Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought evil on these people. You have not delivered your people at all."
God's plan beginning to unfold. He's starting to lay things out that absolutely can't be reversed from this point on. In Exodus chapter 6, keep on reading, please.
God spoke further to Moses and said to him, "I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. Yet my name, Adonai, did I not make myself known to them? I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan and the land of their pilgrimage where they journeyed. Furthermore, I have heard the groanings of Ben Yisrael, whom the Egyptians are keeping in bondage. So I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to Ben Yisrael, I am Adonai. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you to myself as my people, and I will be your God. You will know that I am Adonai your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and give it to you as an inheritance. I am Adonai." Moses spoke this way to Ben Yisrael, but they did not listen to him because of their broken spirits and the cruel bondage. So Adonai told Moses, "Go speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that will he let Ben Yisrael go out of the land." But Moses said to Adonai, "Ben Yisrael have not listened to me. So how would Pharaoh listen to me? I who have uncircumcised lips.
Moses had trouble speaking. So in all of this, when you have trouble speaking in front of people, sometimes things don't come out right. Sometimes things get confused. But from here on, the Almighty himself is going to speak through Moses, and Moses isn't going to have a problem speaking. Moses went back to Pharaoh with the instructions directly from the throne room of heaven. Exodus chapter 7, verse 1 through 6. Go ahead and read that.
So Adonai said to Moses, "See, I have set you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother will be your prophet. You are to speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother is to speak to Pharaoh, so that he will let Ben Yisrael go out of this land. Yet I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, but Pharaoh will not listen to you. So I will lay my hand upon Egypt and bring forth my armies, my people Ben Yisrael, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. The Egyptians will know that I am Adonai, and when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out Ben Yisrael from among them."
There's a lot of things that are about to happen, and when we read it, it happens really, really quickly. But it didn't happen as fast as we read it, if that makes sense. It didn't happen, it happened one right after the other, but not in a period, it takes us, maybe just a few minutes to read it. But it took several days and probably weeks for this to really play out properly. Moses was able to do signs in front of Pharaoh. Aaron's staff turning into a serpent and swallowing the other snakes made by Pharaoh's magicians. The Egyptians worshipped many gods, but the God of Abraham was about to destroy each and every one of them one at a time. Today, this defeat of those Egyptian gods is what we call the plagues. The first plague, Hapi, was against Hapi, the god of the Nile River itself. Aaron touched the river and turned it to blood. The fish died. The river smelled horrible. Hapi was defeated, but Pharaoh's magicians were actually able to partially duplicate what Aaron's rod had done. Pharaoh wasn't impressed, and Jehovah had to harden his heart. Heket was the goddess of fertility. She had the head of a frog. Kind of weird, but that's the way they did things back then. They gave these things images that they could understand at the time. To display the senseless worship to this god, Moses told Pharaoh the land would be stricken with frogs. And it was countless frogs. Frogs everywhere. The magicians were able to put the frogs back. The magicians tried, but they only brought more frogs. And finally they went to Moses and said, "Moses, you got to do something." So he put the frogs back in the river. Cheb, the god of the earth, while lice were already a problem in Egypt, they were able to control them until Moses told Aaron to touch the earth with his rod. The dust of the earth became lice all over Egypt. Pharaoh's magicians could not compete this time. Nothing they did had any effect on the lice, and they told Pharaoh, This is the finger of God." Khepri was the Egyptian god of creation, the movement of the sun and rebirth. Moses meets Pharaoh in the morning and relays again the message from God, "Let my people go that they may serve me." But again, Pharaoh said no, and flies began to swarm and infest Egypt. Hathor, we're all familiar with, the goddess of love and protection. He has the head of a cow. This meeting with Pharaoh ends with Moses speaking that the hand of God would be all in the livestock in Egypt, and all the cattle belonging to the Egyptians died, but the cattle that belonged to the Israelites did not die. Isis was the goddess of medicine and peace. Moses takes a handful of ash, throws it in the air. For the first time, the Egyptians themselves are directly affected by boils and sores. Nut was the goddess of the sky. Moses warns Pharaoh, but to no avail. Hail destroys the flax and the barley. That's going to be very important in the coming months. Seth was the god of storms and disorder. Locusts swarmed Egypt with voracious appetite, destroying everything that was left. Ra, the sun god. Complete darkness covered Egypt, so dark you couldn't see anything. No hint of light at all. Even hope was blackened out of the hearts of the Egyptians. And finally, the Almighty defeated Pharaoh himself, the power of Egypt, the representation of all that the strength of Egypt, that Egypt was. It also represents man. This time, a warning and an offering of safety for the average Egyptian caught in Pharaoh's self-destructive opposition to God. Death of the firstborn. In Exodus 12, here's where things get good. You want to start reading.
Now Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month will mark the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one lamb for the household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor are to take one according to the number of people, according to each person eating. You are to make your count for the lamb. Your lamb is to be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You must watch over it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to slaughter it at twilight. They are to take the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the crossbeam of the houses, where they will eat it. They are to eat the meat that night, roasted over a fire, with matzah and bitter herbs. They are to eat it. Do not eat any of the raw or boiled with water, but only roasted with fire, its head with its legs and its innards. Also, let nothing of it remain until morning. Whatever remains until morning you are to burn with fire. Also, you are to eat it this way, with your loins girded and your shoes on your feet and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in haste. It is Adonai's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. I am Adonai. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. So there will be no plagues among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day is to be a memorial for you. You are to keep it as a feast of Adonai. Throughout your generations, you are to keep it as an eternal ordinance.
And the children of Abraham followed these instructions. And there was a whole lot of people in Egypt at the time who looked around and they saw what was going on with the Israelites, and they said, I'm not sure why, but we need to do what they're doing. I don't know what's going on, but we need to join with them. And they did. It didn't matter if you were a child of Abraham or if it was just somebody who understood what they saw and said, there's something about that group of people. There's something about that group of people that's special. We need to join with them. We need to either walk up and knock on the door and say, can we join you? Or we need to sneak in and get grafted in. We need to be part of it. I need to be part of that movement. They watched as the Egyptians' pagan gods were defeated one by one. Everyone who had prepared their households did not suffer the last of the plagues. They were not only allowed to leave their slavery behind, but they were allowed to leave. They left everything. They left their bondage. They left all of the grief and all of the heartache. But they took with them the wealth of Egypt. Exodus 12:31-36. Go ahead.
During the night, the king called for Moses and Aaron. He said to them, "Get up and leave my people. You and your people may do as you have asked. Go and worship the Lord. Take all your sheep and cattle as you have asked. Go and also bless me." The Egyptians also asked the Israelites to hurry and leave. They said, "If you don't leave, we will all die." The people of Israel took their dough before the yeast was added. They wrapped the bowls for making dough in clothing and carried them on their shoulders. The people of Israel did what Moses told them to do. They asked their Egyptian neighbors for things made of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord caused the Egyptians to think well of the Israelites, so the Israelites took rich gifts from the Egyptians.
Now, that last part was actually from the International Children's Bible, and I really like that translation sometimes because it breaks things down pretty simple. It says, the Lord caused the Egyptians to think well of the Israelites, and they took many rich gifts from the Egyptians. It was a mixed multitude of people that left Egypt. They set out, they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what was going to happen. They weren't sure what was happening. Mm-hmm. The only thing they really understood was they had to leave. Moses led the people across the desert. And what was left of the Egyptian army began to follow. Pharaoh decided it wasn't such a good idea to let those people go. And so he took what was left of the Egyptian army and he set out to conquer them. On a small stretch of beach near what is now Nueva, Egypt, this mixed multitude appeared trapped. They had the Gulf of Aqaba in front of them. Pharaoh's army was behind them. And in Exodus 14:10-12 we read, "When Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes. And behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. So they were terrified, and the children of Israel cried out to Jehovah. They said to Moses, 'You've taken us away to die in the wilderness because there were no graves in Egypt?'" They were starting to complain pretty fast. Mm-hmm. "Why have you dealt with us this way? Why'd you bring us out here to die? We could have stayed in Egypt. We could have been better off in Egypt than dying in the wilderness." But Moses faced this challenge from this group of people. But the thing is, this time everybody was going to see something special. There was not going to be any doubt what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Jehovah drove back the sea with a strong east wind throughout the night. It turned the sea into dry land so that the waters were divided. The children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, while the waters were like walls around them on their right and on their left. Pharaoh, in his arrogance, he chased them. He chased them.
He did.
When the children of Abraham were across and out of harm's way, the Almighty let the waters close in on the Egyptian army. Pharaoh, the army, the horses, the chariots, it was all gone. They drowned. Nothing remained. The Israelites had a few minutes to celebrate the Almighty's victory before they continued on their journey to Mount Sinai with a great deal of grumbling and complaining. but Moses was leading this group of people to meet God. We tell this story, and we're told to teach this lesson to our children so they can teach their children, so they can teach their children. Mm-hmm. But do we teach it to our children so they can teach their children so that we can remember? Or is it for us now? I said when I started this that their hardships, their story, their cries, their prayers are much like ours. We find ourselves quite often on all of these things. We find ourselves put to the point where we are, how would I want to say this, trapped slaves to our own sin. And every once in a while we find ourselves, as I like to say, looking from underneath the bottom to see the up of the last part of down. Right? When you are so low that you have to look up to see the bottom of down, that's the feeling these people had. But God had already been working for these folks, and He's already been working for us.
That's right.
Willing, absolutely willing to say, here's where we need to go, here's where we need to be, here's what we need to do. So, today, we don't get up and physically leave Egypt. But we still face the same situation. We still have to be able to get ready. We have to decide that we want to leave. We have to kind of fix it in our mind and in our heart that we don't want to be where we're at anymore. And quite often, as we start out, something pulls us back. Something pulls us back. Something's grabbing hold of us. Something doesn't want us to go.
Or something's chasing after.
Or something. Well, I'm going to that.
Sorry.
As we try to leave, I don't know what particular thing somebody might be wanting to get out of. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's pick your poison, as they say. Might not be anything that drastic. It might be just something, I'm just not ready. I'm not ready to go. Well, now I'm ready to go, but something's holding me back. And finally, it lets you go. It lets you go. You take a couple of steps and you look around. You go, well, I don't know where I'm headed yet, but there's something out there. And you look around and something's chasing you. Something's coming after you. And usually, and this is going to sound bad, but usually it's those folks you called friends who are trying to drag you back into whatever it was you were in. They're trying to pull you down. Oh, we love you. We think you're great. We want you back here so we can use some more of you. We need your cheap labor. We need your whatever it is that you were giving them that they're no longer going to have if you go. And it gets to the point where if you just stay ahead of them, it sometimes seems like there is that separation of the waters where you start through. And it's terrifying when you see all these, high waves on either side of you, but you just kind of keep on going, and you get on the other side of it. And you look around and you say, I made that one. That was close, but I made it out. And the problem is, you're on the other side, but you still remember what it was like. You want to go back. You want to turn around and do what you were doing. And that's not possible. Because once you leave, they didn't have a bridge to burn crossing the Red Sea, but it sure flooded.
It did.
It sure flooded. And that's exactly how we need to think of that. We think about these things, we leave a bad situation, and we want to turn around and go back. And I know what that means, the message you're looking at. We want to turn around and go back. But we don't. Sometimes people do drastic things to turn around and go back. But you don't have to. You don't have to. Passover is not just a story about history. Passover is not just a story about a miracle that happened one time. Passover is a lesson that we can live today. And because of all of the other things that were set up in this situation, it's not about the meal. It's about the journey. The meal's a good teaching focus point. I'm not going to argue that at all. It's a wonderful teaching point. But we need to not focus on the meal. We need to focus on the journey. Because the meal is over.
Mm-hmm.
The meal's over. But the journey is the hard part. The journey, you get out in the desert, you get thirsty. You get thirsty. And Moses says, "Why are you thirsty?" And you look at him and say, "Moses, there's nothing to drink." Or maybe, "The water's terrible. We can't drink this water." Mm-hmm. And Moses looks to God and says, "What do I do?" He gets his orders and does what God tells him to do. Luckily, these people that came out of Egypt had Moses. If you look around, you're not going to find somebody that can strike. Chances are you might find somebody that can strike a rock and get water out of it. Kind of doubt it. These days, that's going to be few and far between. Okay? But there's going to be somebody that you can talk to that can say, "Here's where you need to go. Here's what you need to do. Here's the path forward. You don't have to turn around and go back." Mm-hmm. That's what this thing called Passover is all about. There's other events that surround Passover and the Almighty uses in Passover to make it possible that we can start over. The entire crucifixion, resurrection takes place. And it was a Wednesday, by the way. It wasn't Friday. So this year actually fits the Passover crucifixion, resurrection story. Crucified on Passover, put in the ovens the same time, or put in the grave the same time the lambs were being put in the ovens. Isn't that amazing how the Almighty decides to work all that together? There may be a writer somewhere that was smart enough to come up with this. Sean's still watching. He's written books. I've written books. I'm not smart enough to come up with this stuff. The Almighty was. He said, "Watch what I can do. I can show you this, and y'all are going to think it's this, and then I'm going to do something with it, because my blueprint works the same way every time." He gives us that opportunity to take the blood and to cure everything, to make it possible that we can start over. We don't have to turn around and go back. But there's a catch. There's a catch. The Almighty didn't put the people out in the wilderness and just leave them. He took them to a place and He taught them. Well, He tried to teach them. Let's be honest. He tried. He said, "Okay, here's how I designed you to live. If you'll listen to me, no problem. I will protect you. You will be a treasure to me. Nobody will be able to take you out of my hand." Right? Mm-hmm. Today, we need to be able to tell people, if you'll listen, and if you'll do what the Almighty says, mm-hmm. if you will decide to live the way He designed you to live, He will protect you.
That's right.
Nothing will take you out of His hand. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say you're going to live in this world until you're 600 years old.
No.
No, it doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say you're not going to get sick. It doesn't say every day is going to be a holiday and every meal is going to be a feast. That's not part of the agreement. The agreement is you're going to be special to the Almighty, the Creator of the universe. You're going to have something that somebody else wants. And the only way they're going to get it is if you share the story. If you teach mm-hmm. what we have in Scripture, and then you teach it to your children so that they can teach it to their children. Mm-hmm. Not just so that they can remember what had happened, but so that they can use the knowledge of what happened and use it for themselves today.
That's it.
Everyone, I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful Passover this year. Tomorrow night, we're back live at 7:30. And it's going to be interesting tomorrow night because I'm going to. Should I let him in on a little bit of what I want to talk about? For Christians, you face a huge opposition or a huge obstacle, not opposition, obstacle. Sometimes people like to keep Yeshua in the manger, cute little baby in the manger. Sometimes they like to keep him on the cross. They don't like him where he's at today. They don't think that fits. But the big obstacle is they spend so much time concentrating on the cross that they forget about the rest. And that's part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow night. And it fits. It's continuation of what we just did. I hope you can join us. Do you have anything you wanted to add? No? Mm-hmm. I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful evening. Hope to see you all again tomorrow.
Happy Passover.
Happy Passover, everyone. Thank you for joining us.